So let's settle this once and for all. What is a RAW file and why should you be using it? How much better is a RAW file than a JPEG file? I've seen so many explanation videos online that sort of edit a RAW file and edit the exact same file that's in JPEG format and say, well, you can kind of see this JPEG is a little more gray than the RAW file, so you should use the RAW file. But I feel like most of these visual comparisons are rather poor explanations of the actual power of RAW files. So before we jump in, I need to explain something really quickly, and that's bit depth. Every image has a bit depth, and the bit depth of an image is just a measure of how many colors that image can store. So don't let this scare you away. It may seem a little bit technical, but it's really easy to understand, I promise. So a JPEG has 8 bits. And 8 bits is pretty much the norm. That's how many bits are on Instagram photos, Facebook photos, photos you take on your iPhone. Your screen displays 8 bits of color information. And 8-bit means that each channel has 256 possible shades. So 256 shades of red, green, and blue. And we get that number by raising 2 to the power of whatever the bit depth is. So in this case, it's 8. 2 to the power of 8 is 256. Now the thing you need to understand with bits is that every bit you add doubles the amount of information you can store. So while an 8-bit image has 256 shades of red, green, and blue, a 9-bit image would have 512 shades of red, green, and blue. So, if a JPEG is 8-bit, then how many bits does a RAW file have? Does it have 9 bits? 10? 11? Well, the average RAW file actually has 14 bits of information. That means 16,000 possible color values per channel. So now let's take that information and use it in a slightly more visual example. So I have this image which I took in RAW and in JPEG. So this image is clearly very underexposed. So here's the histogram, and as you can see, almost the entire image is contained within the bottom about 5% of the color spectrum, so that would be all blacks. Let's look at the JPEG first. 5% of 256, that's how many shades are in a JPEG, is about 12. So that's about 12 shades of color making up this entire image. So if you take it and it looks fine as is, then okay. But in this case, it's severely underexposed, and when we increase the exposure, those 12 shades become further and further apart, and it becomes more and more noticeable. And as you can see, this looks terrible. So basically, with a JPEG, you have to get your exposure spot on or pretty close, or else you're just going to end up with a ruined image. So now let's try and do the same thing on the RAW file. So remember, a RAW file is 14-bit, which means it has about 16,000 colors per channel. Now, 5% of 16,000 is about 800 shades. So already the darkest 5% of this RAW image has more information than an entire JPEG. This means that when we increase the exposure, that color information is stretched out, but there's more than enough color information to spare. And so the image looks great, perfectly exposed. That means when you're shooting in RAW, even if your exposure is pretty far off, you can still recover quite well just because of the crazy amount of information that's stored in a RAW file. And of course, recovering very poorly exposed photos is only one example of how you can use all the extra information that the RAW format provides. Since with a JPEG, you're starting with 256 color values and you're outputting 256 color values, you don't really have much wiggle room to modify the exposure, the contrast, any sort of tones or coloring on the image. So that pretty much wraps this video up. If you found this information helpful, feel free to leave a like. And if you're interested in seeing more videos like this, hit that subscribe button. And if you can think of anybody who might benefit from this information, feel free to share it with them.